to introduce us to this afternoon topic because here is afternoon. It's not in the US. It's the morning, but here it's 6:30. You're going to talk about structural challenges to the realization of sustainable development goals. So over to you, Professor Sachs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be together with you. I hope that our Wi Fi connection will remain strong. If there's any problem, please call me by telephone and we will then reconnect. But it's a pleasure and an honor to be able to speak with you about sustainable development and the challenges that we face. The concept of sustainable development is the most important public policy concept in our world today. What it means is that we should promote economic development that is socially inclusive and environmentally sustainable, so that what Pope Francis also calls integral human development. We have to take a holistic vision of the development process. It's not good enough to have a rising income if the income is very unequally distributed. And it is certainly not good enough to have industrialization and uh, economic development if it destroys tragedy for uh, humanity and for the rest of life on Earth. The problem is that the global economic system does not produce sustainable development on its own. The market economy does not produce sustainable development. The market economy is quite good, actually, at promoting economic growth. It is quite good at creating the incentives to make profits. It's quite good at motivating people to make a lot of activity, but it is not good at ensuring fairness, at ensuring justice, or at ensuring environmental sustainability. This, of course, is why the church's social teaching for the last uh, 125 years since Rerum Novarum, because the essence of the church's social teachings is that we need a market economy, but it should be in a framework of moral commitment. And it should be a market economy that lives within moral boundaries and that it respects human dignity and that it respects the creation, the physical earth. And the great social teachings from Rerum Novarum and Populorum Progressio and Centesimus Annus and now Laudato Si are all within this framework. That yes, a world market economy, but first a moral framework which guarantees that our economy is inclusive, it is socially just, it is a natural environment. Now, this is not the reality in the world today. The reality in the world today is a very wealthy world, very divided between rich and poor. The reality in the world today is a very dynamic world economy that is doing tremendous damage to the natural environment. And the damage comes in two major, actually three major ways. One is the global warming, which is very serious and very dangerous. The second is the destruction of other species and of habitat all over the world, deforestation and degradation of land, uh, and the depletion of the oceans, because the economic power is much stronger than the forces of conservation. And the third structural problem environmentally is pollution, chemical pollutants, air pollution, water pollution are killing millions of people every year. So, a very urgent way, and much wealth, but too much poverty still, and absolutely dangerous environmental degradation. The governments of the world have recognized these dangers, but they don't act on them very satisfactorily. Back in 2015, all 193 member governments of the United Nations adopted the Sustainable Development Goals as a way to cooperate in order to achieve sustainable development worldwide. This is also called the Agenda 2030, which is the global framework of the United Nations and every country within it to achieve sustainable development and to cooperate for that purpose. That agreement was reached on September 25th, 2015, and it was a wonderful day at the United Nations because it opened with a speech by Pope Francis speaking to world leaders, calling on them to make the moral commitment of sustainable and integral human development. And they adopted Agenda 23 that day. Development goals in it. And of course, I hope everybody knows the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The number one goal is to end extreme poverty. So, goal number one says that by the year 2030, extreme poverty should be eliminated. I'll mention some other goals. Goal number three says that every person should have access to health services. In other words, everybody should be able to access affordable health services. Goal number four says that every child should be able to complete at least a secondary school education, no matter whether they're born rich or poor, urban or rural, in any part of the world, every child should be able to complete at least a secondary education. Goal number eight says that there should be decent work for all, and that all forms of human bondage, all modern forms of slavery, all human trafficking should be eliminated. Goal number 13 says that we should take actions together to end global warming and to protect all of us from climate change. Goal number 14 says we should protect the oceans. Goal number 15 says we should protect the biodiversity on the land, and so on. 17 goals, all scheduled for the year 2030. Very important objectives. Now, the basic point I would say is that they are in complete alignment with Laudato Si. They constitute a bold but also realistic program for holistic, sustainable development. poorest people on the. But the main point is they are not self-implementing objectives. They will not happen by themselves. The world economy does not work that way. Only if we decide in public policies in every country and in international diplomacy that we are going to move in the direction to achieve the sustainable development goals, do we have a chance to actually succeed. This is why governments that undertake serious plans of action, that look ahead, that have a ministry of planning that is in charge of making a plan up to the year 2030, have a chance for success. We need to use these sustainable development goals strategically in order to change the way that we are operating and in order to influence the way the world economy operates so that it is more fair and more environmentally sustainable. There is one doctrine of the church, of course, one that I would put a lot of emphasis is that we should be seeing health that we have worldwide available to society, not just in private hands, but available in society to achieve the common good. That's the meaning of the universal destination goods, that we don't put private property above everything. We put the common good above everything. And when private property is in a few hands, those wealth holders are responsible to the rest of society. Let me give you one example. If you ask about the billionaires in the world today, there are 2,043 billionaires in the world, just 2,000 billionaires. Their combined wealth is $8 trillion, just 2,000 people. If you can imagine that. 2,000 people and they command the wealth of $8 trillion. So the universal destination of goods says they are responsible to share that wealth with the rest of society to achieve the common good. Pope Progressio, when Pope Paul VI quotes Ambrose, who said, when a rich man gives to a poor man, he is not giving a gift to the poor man, he is giving the poor man what he already owns. Property of the rich man, but the guaranteed basic needs of the poor man. And this is the principle that we need to establish very clearly. Of course, another crucial principle of the church is the preferential option for the poor. We have to make sure that as we run the economy, we're looking after the interests of the poor people. This is not happening in most of our countries, especially, I could say, the United States, for example, my own country. My own country is very rich. The average income per rich people are very greedy, after all. They want to keep their own money. Framework. And this, I think, is the big challenge that we face. let me summarize some of the specific challenges that we need to succeed in. Big challenges. The first is to transform the world's energy system. Right now, the world's energy system depends on coal, oil, and natural gas. We need to move to an energy system that is based on solar energy, wind energy, hydroelectric power, and other zero carbon energy sources. Fortunately, some of the poorest countries in the world that don't have oil and gas have a lot of sunshine. And so now we're in a technological era where the countries near the desert, for example, countries in the Sahel of Africa, countries like Mali, Niger, Central African Republic, Burkina Faso, Senegal, that have been very poor, now have a chance to gain modern energy with Guinea, have a lot of hydroelectric power, or Congo Kinshasa, the Democratic Republic of Congo, has at Inga Falls a vast amount of energy available, very clean, but it needs the investment in order to carry it out. So the first challenge is low carbon energy in order to avoid dangerous climate change. A second major goal is sustainable agriculture. We cannot continue degrading the land, cutting down the rainforests, and depleting the water. Our agriculture system has to move to a more scientific basis that is much more efficient in using the natural resources and much more productive for the farmers themselves. This is a very big challenge, but very urgent. A third challenge is to make our cities sustainable. The world's population is moving quickly to cities. Are the cities ready? Do they have decent water and sewerage systems? Do they have roads? Do they have power supply? Do they have clinics and schools? All of this means that we need a major focus on sustainable cities. That is Sustainable Development Goal number 11. The fourth structural challenge I want to mention is what I already described as Sustainable Development Goal number 3 and Sustainable Development Goal number 4. That is universal access to health care and universal access to education. This is really vital. And especially for Africa's children, I want to emphasize we need to ensure that every child in Africa can complete at least a secondary school education. And one of the heartening developments last month is that President Akufo-Addo of Ghana announced free universal secondary education in Ghana, free upper secondary education. We need to help him to achieve this vision. And I also want the church schools, which are wonderfully important schools throughout Africa, to play a role, a bigger role, to ensure that every African child can stay in school, at least through upper secondary school. So these are big challenges of sustainable development. What are some of the obstacles to sustainable development? Well, the first one, I would again use a church teaching. Uh, it is the structures of sin. around our modern economy, especially corporations that don't behave themselves. Think of how Shell Oil Company behaved in the Niger Delta, for example, with incredible irresponsibility, massive pollution. It took the resources out, it left the disease and the poverty inside. This is not acceptable. Think of all of the cheating on taxes of these big companies. Think of all of the cheating in the uh, tax havens in the Caribbean, for example. Who runs those tax havens? I can tell you, it is Washington and London that run those tax havens. And so these are structures of sin, not just individual sinful behavior, but these are structures of power that we face in the world. We need to tell the governments of the world, you must close down these tax havens because they are leading to the massive stealing of money from poor countries and the massive irresponsibility by these corporations in their pollution and their environmental practices. Most of these companies have shell companies, so we don't even know who owns them. They cheat, they move money offshore, and this is very important that we bring under control. A second structural obstacle, of course, is the greed that is manifest in the politics of the rich countries. The rich countries have long promised to give 0.7 of 1%, just 0.7 of 1%. Of course, you can afford to do that. Any country can afford to do that if they so choose. But in the United States, for example, the US government is giving just 0.17. In other words, one fourth, it's giving 1/5 of 1% in development aid. Now, the US is a very rich country. It's spending 30 times more on the military than it is spending on development aid. And this is, of course, absolutely unacceptable. And my job, more moral force in the world. But right now, the forces of greed and the forces of militarism are dominant, and we have to fight them. A third area, of course, that's very dangerous is the interethnic violence. And here we need the religious leaders always to be saying very clearly, not in the name of religion. This violence is politicians that are misusing religion. It is the demagogues that are telling lies, but often saying that it's because of religion. And this interethnic hate is a very world growing danger in the world because of all of the nationalism that we see all around us. And I'd say that a fourth obstacle comes to what Pope Francis called the globalization of indifference. And by that, he means that in our world of social media, in our world of quick images, in our world of massive advertising, the attention is directed towards the superficial. It's directed towards the consumerism. It's directed towards the media images. And we don't even recognize when our own lives are at peril through global warming or environmental threats. And so Pope Francis calls on us to overcome the globalization of indifference. And here we need the messages being spread everywhere in the world that we have agreed to the Sustainable Development Goals. There is, as Pope Francis called for, a common plan for our common home, but we need to implement it. And governments need to follow through on their promises. And universities need to work with governments to give the expertise that is needed to help follow through. Possible. As I've said, I would like to see the church step up its activities in teaching in Africa, for example, because we need more secondary schools. We need more places for children to be able to get a secondary education. And I believe we can raise more funds, more philanthropic funds, or more government funds to support such activities. So this is a very, very big challenge, obviously. And at a time of indifference, sometimes at a time of too much war, at a time of selfishness, at a time of greed, it sometimes is hard to get the attention of the world on these issues. But fortunately, Pope Francis is really giving us leadership everywhere in the world, and people are listening. They're reading Laudato Si. They are trying to focus on the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is a very important moment, therefore, for us to reinforce our efforts and really put the emphasis on practical accomplishment, as I mentioned, in energy transformation, in sustainable agriculture, in sustainable cities, and in universal access to health and education services. I believe we could meet all of these 17 sustainable development goals, but the time is running out and they won't be successful on their own, only if we provide the leadership for them. So let me thank you for the chance to be with you. I hope that I could be heard. It seems that the internet treated us nicely so that you could hear at least most of what I was saying. And so that is, I think, the spirit with us that makes it possible for this good interchange. And back to you.